Hello.
Hey.
Okay, we've been gone a few weeks and we're still here. Um, Real quick tonight, I wanted to welcome Mr. CF Roberts. He's joining our gang of misfits. And Yeah, do you want to say anything about yourself, sir?
Well, let me see. I'm a writer, an artist, a videographer, and any of your mileage may vary on those terms. Um, Fan of movies.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And so yeah, since we're doing the one screen at a time thing, this is how it's going to be recorded. I just want to have everybody be like, "Hey, I'm here." So we've also got Bill Mulligan. Bill.
Hey, everybody. Bill Mulligan. This is my first published book, Rom, and I keep forgetting to mention it here. Yeah, you can get it on Amazon. It's got lots
Yeah,
of
well done. Excellent.
lots of anti-heroes in it. Thank you
Awesome.
so much. It's so cool. I just hope the second one's good.
Without
Congratulations.
fail. Yeah, that's awesome. And Kaelyn Ireland is here with us.
Hello, I'm Kaelyn
Hi.
Ireland here.
Yes, so Kaelyn, just by dint of being a kind, hardworking person, has been like promoted to being like my co-producer and helping me get everything organized. So,
Oh,
and she's done a really good
congratulations,
job.
Caleb.
Yeah, I wish
Does it
there
come
was a
with a
pay
dental
involved.
plan? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
right.
I also wish there was a dental plan. That'd be great.
They come in handy.
And I think the last person that's going to be the first person to speak tonight, we're going to talk about the subject of anti-heroes in film and television. So that's kind of like we've said, a rabbit hole. Uh, but I penned a little introduction, and Kaylin edited it, and we're going to turn it over to Justin to share it, and then share some anti-heroes that he came up with.
no problem. Do you want me to start,
Sure,
Henry? Or
man. Yes, sir.
okay, all right. To begin with, okay. So just as a summary, the anti-hero in film and television is a figure that is as hotly debated as it is celebrated by audiences. Anti-heroes are often associated with the so-called superhero media or genre, but they can be found in any genre. We must keep in mind that the so-called hero in this case simply means a protagonist. This protagonist doesn't address conflict or solve dilemmas they encounter through conventional or heroic means, and they may not be brave or noble, magnanimous, loyal, or even particularly kind. The anti-hero is often quite the opposite of complex morality and nature. While his or her ultimate goal may serve the greater good or represent the lesser evil compared to the antagonist, the anti-hero's rationale could be based entirely on self-interest and self-enrichment. He might be downright unethical and resort to theft, assault, drug dealing, or pimping because to him, as to Machiavelli, the ends justify the means. You might see the anti-heroine ally herself with the so-called good guys because doing so moves her closer to her goal, but she won't hesitate to eschew their rules if necessary. She might be willing to break the law, even going as far as killing someone who gets in her way, whether they deserved it or not. She might even use torture to get information she needs. One especially common trait among anti-heroes is an anti-authoritarian attitude, which is often common amongst anti-heroes, which many viewers find appealing. In narratives where corrupt authority figures work against the common man, the anti-hero may seem like an outright hero in comparison, despite their rough-hewn approach or complex attitudes towards conflict. Although rough around the edges, the anti-hero can be quite an endearing character. Multi-dimensional work on the part of the writer, director, and/or performer may elevate audience sympathy for the character, leading viewers to like the unlikable. Additionally, the viewer's personal sense of morality and socio-political views may significantly color their judgment of the character's actions, which can elicit a different reaction than intended by the creative team. Thus, whether a character is an anti-hero is ultimately subjective. For example, to some viewers, Paul Kersey is an anti-hero, to others an outright hero, but to others a villain. Controversial pop culture figures emerging after Kersey include Travis Bickle, Tony Montana, one of my personal favourites, Walter White, Beatrix Kiddo, Lisbeth Salander, The Punisher, Rorschach, Harley Quinn, and some modern iterations of Batman. This list is far from comprehensive, and you may not personally consider each of these examples to be anti-heroes. The line between hero and anti-hero shouldn't be drawn lightly. Heroes can be flawed without necessarily being anti-heroes. A genuinely altruistic character who is rebellious or has a so-called bad attitude can certainly be a flawed hero rather than an anti-hero. Consider, for example, Roger DeMarco of Dawn of the Dead. He's a good guy at heart who simply wants to help. The defiance of the established order and social norms is a current that runs through the anti-hero. A fierce, unshakable individualism is almost universal in such characters, and many have their own inner code, which is a line of demarcation that even they won't cross, for that way lies villainhood. Exactly where these lines fall provokes different levels of acceptance or rejection by the story's other players and by the audience. If they represent even a subtle spectrum of personal mores, some form of conflict with the so-called heroic camp will occur, the heroic camp generally being almost purely virtuous and good, and not as much, or if any, room for moral ambiguity, I would suggest. The ever-present threat of internecine drama is a mighty engine propelling towards characterizations and the tale itself. So that was the very valuable summary prepared by Henry, and
Thank you, sir.
Miss Ireland as well, Kaelyn. So that's the introduction. Henry, I'll go on then to talk about the two that I'd plucked out as examples of anti-heroes, if you like.
Absolutely.
So the first one was Tony Montana in the film Scarface. It's a 1983 film Brian De Palma directed, played by Al Pacino, of course. I've seen it again recently at an Art Deco cinema near me, the Astor, where we're lucky enough to have the character who played Manny, Stephen Bauer, appear on stage and give a Q&A. He'd had a few drinks, I think, but he spoke very well for half an hour, and then it was a bit of an auction and then the film. So that was back in about June this year. But in the film itself, the character Tony Montana is a refugee from Castro's Cuba. He had been in jail just before he was part of the flood of immigrants from Cuba to Miami. Spent some time in sort of a halfway camp underneath the freeway off-ramp in Miami with Manny. He also has a mother and younger sister who live in Miami for several years before he arrived. And you can see that he's very close to his sister, his younger sister. So he's not a purely villainous character. He has that affection and sympathy for her, but at the same time, he's not trusted by his mother at all. And that the reasons why become crystal clear as the film develops. He is a violent character and uses violence as a means to an end when working for Frank Lopez, the mob boss, who himself can be very charming and hospitable, but has obviously a dark side. During the film, Tony Montana enters into a love affair or relationship with the character played by Michelle Pfeiffer, who is the current wife or partner of the mob boss, Frank Lopez. So again, that shows the softer side of the character, Tony Montana. The audience is also invited to barrack for, using the Australian term, or root for the main character, particularly in the more violent scenes. There's one near the start of the film where there's a drug deal gone wrong in a motel room on Miami Beach. I think most of us know the scene with some Colombian drug pushers, peddlers. And so you certainly have the audience sympathy for Tony Montana in that scene. And also later on when there's an assassination attempt against him in the Babylon bar. But at the same time, there's a destructive course. The character tends to consume the product that has been sold, and his character ends up on a downward spiral. It destroys his relationship with Manny, for example, his best friend, and also more significantly with his sister towards the end of the film, and of course also Michelle Pfeiffer. But he's not a character that doesn't have some form of moral code at the end of it. Towards the end of the film, he's asked by a South American mob boss to attempt to assassinate someone who works for the UN in New York City. He travels to New York City, but when he sees the intended target get into a car with his wife and children, he decides that he's not going to go through with the hit, much to the disgust of the mob contact who's with him at the time, who then obviously has to be killed as part of that scene. But that did show that in a strange way, Al Pacino's character had a moral code, a line he would not cross, despite the consequences, where other people who were his contemporaries wouldn't have had such a moral handbrake.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, most of us have seen the film. There's some lighter-hearted moments in it, particularly where one of my favourite scenes is where he gives the speech to the other diners in a restaurant after he's had the huge row with Michelle Pfeiffer's character. But he's on a downward spiral, and ultimately that's where his character is left at by the end of the film. But the film is certainly one of my personal favourites. Now, just briefly, there was another character as an anti-hero I wanted to touch on more briefly, which is it's based on a real-life character. And I've always been interested in 1930s Depression era gangster stories, or true stories, if you like. Public Enemy was a great film and book. This one is Clyde Barrow as of Bonnie and Clyde, played by Warren Beatty in the 1968 classic Bonnie and Clyde with Faye Dunaway. Now, the character obviously starts off robbing banks in Depression-era Texas and then moves to other states. He could be seen, I guess, as a Robin Hood type of character because he's basically robbing those that are foreclosing on mortgages and hold the wealth and the money where most of the population has nothing at this time of history. Mm-hmm. His romance with Bonnie Parker, played by Faye Dunaway, is explored in detail. Apparent struggles with his sexuality in that he can't perform sexually with Bonnie Parker, much to his shame, I guess you could say. And it's sort of left out there whether he's actually a heterosexual character at all, I think, and I think that's actually been touched on in biographies of the actual character as well. So that invites a bit of sympathy, I guess, on the part of the audience watching the film. He's also very close to his older brother, Buck Barrow, played by Gene Hackman in the film. And so some people have argued that the 1968 film was a bit of a glorified or sanitized take on the real historical figure. That may or may not be true. There's also a scene near the end where their younger accomplice, whose name escapes me, it might have been JT or something similar, but he takes the injured Bonnie and Clyde in a car to a camping ground near the side of a lake where there's a lot of impoverished and transient people. And even though this is the era before social media, they all seem to know who they are. And you can see the sort of celebrity status that Bonnie and Clyde have with these people. Mm-hmm. So again, that evokes the Robin Hood type, I guess, comparison with the Clyde Barrow character. And of course, the ending, when I first saw this film as maybe a 10-year-old, I was shocked by the ending and how it finishes. And I guess you could say the police are portrayed in a way as possibly ruthless, particularly when you look at the final scene, which is, of course, what actually happened in real life. So I certainly think that Clyde Barrow, as portrayed in the film, although a real-life character, probably fits the bill of an anti-hero as well. So I'd invite anyone's thoughts on those two films.
Well, that movie was very notorious when it came out for how bloody it was to be a studio film. And then, of course, then a year later, well, same year maybe, The Wild Bunch comes out and it's even bloodier. But they were
Yeah.
controversial, you know.
You're also not used to seeing the protagonist just completely Swiss cheesed at the end, you know.
Right.
I like Swiss cheese as a verb.
Yeah.
It's delightful.
That was a wonderful period of cinema. There was just
It was. May it come back again in my
Great
lifetime.
films around that time as well.
yeah. Yeah, I really like it. I saw it on TV as a kid, and it was the cut version, so I didn't see all the blood
Right.
and gut. But years later, um, I acquired a large amount of this guy's Blu-ray collection that he was liquidating when I worked at Second and Charles. So I got them very inexpensively, and there was the I forgot the studio. I think it might be Universal, but they had a not a steel book, but like a real book with you know a booklet inside of it, and the Blu-ray, and I bought that for like $4, and that was a good investment. I was glad to have that in my library because seeing it again, seeing it as it was intended, I should say, for the first time was really powerful. So it was pretty entertaining, and Michael J. Pollard also. I guess became noticed with that movie more or less.
Yeah.
He's the friend I think you mentioned, but
yeah.
everybody's great, you know.
Oh, it's brilliantly cast.
Yeah, Faye could do no wrong during that period. I mean, really, she was on top of it. As far, I mean, you know, Puzzle of a Downfall Child is one of my favorite movies, and that is just so insular and psychological. And the network, she's like totally on the other side. And she was billed first above the title above William Holden. And that was rare back then to have a woman that billed that high. But I always thought she was pretty cool. But Justin, you want to stick around a little bit longer to hear a couple of hours?
Well, absolutely. And I apologize to everyone because I actually got my time wrong, or there's been some sort of daylight saving shift in your country because normally,
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
normally it's at 11 a.m. start,
That
but I was
does
an hour
happen.
early.
Yeah, sorry we do that. It's weird. We
Yeah,
would
we're
like
idiots.
to stop, but Congress is dragging its feet on it. So
It's one of those things that every single person you'll ever talk to says we need to get rid of this, and yet it never happens. So I don't know.
Exactly.
Some
Exactly.
time
Well,
lord
we have exactly the same thing. It's just that our shift was quite a long time ago. So
Mm.
and it's a while since we've had one of these, I think. So yeah, so I got caught out by an hour, but I can still stay for an hour, so that's all good.
Okay.
the thing that's
Fantastic.
really interesting is if you go in the United States to certain indigenous nations, like for example the Navajo Nation, I know doesn't do daylight savings time. So like if you're in Arizona, you go cross over into their nation, like the time changes, like just because you're geographically in the same place but in a different nation, and it's a really interesting situation to have here.
Because
like
time is
United States
time is
doing daylight
man-made.
savings and others not, and it's like
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
it's a mess.
So Chuck is new to us, and he
Uh,
mentioned that he had a lot of possible options to choose from. So let's do what we've been doing, and do one each, and gonna go around and then start over again, so we each get a chance to be heard for a certain amount of time. So Mr. CF, do you want to tell us one of your decisions?
sure.
Cool.
Sure. You hearing me okay, right?
I can hear you great.
Okay. Yeah, no, my first decision with this would be Cosmo Vitelli, I think is his last name, from Killing of a Chinese Bookie, which is John Cassavetes' film from, I think, 1976. And this one really nailed me. This is a character who is basically this nightclub owner, and he kind of likes living large. He's kind of a unlucky gambler, which the story kind of hinges on, and he owns this nightclub that basically puts on these burlesque shows. It's kind of crazy, kind of old-fashioned burlesque, and he how would I say it? He Sorry, guys.
Yeah.
But but it's just these ridiculous skits with these, strippers, dancing girls, and whatnot. And, they have this kind of old vaudeville comedian who's a real sad sack, but he decides, and it seems to be maybe a regular thing with him. He takes his ladies out for a nice day, nice weekend out to this gambling house that's, of course, owned by the mob. He loses big, ends up owing the mob a bunch of money, and ends up pretty much in debt to them. And they tell him, all right, tell you what, here's a way out of this. You go kill this bookie who is associated with the Chinese mafia. He's in this little bungalow across town. He's under heavy guard. And you do that, and consider your debts exonerated. And so, kind of very tense, he goes and does that, and actually gets in around the armed guards and gets in and offs this guy. And after he gets out, he goes back to his club, and the mafiosos are already there, and they can't believe he did it because they basically sent him on a suicide mission. This guy is not a bookie. This guy is a bigwig in the Chinese mafia, which means they probably now got, a storm coming down on them from these folks. And so everybody's out to kill Cosmo. And he narrowly escapes. He ends up killing this one guy, I think, who's played by Seymour Cassel. There are a bunch of great character actors in it. Seymour Cassel, Timothy Carey, a bunch of folks like that. And he ends up, surviving, albeit with a bullet wound. And in this whole thing, he manages, manages to live another day. Saves his club, but they're doing this whole production, song and dance and everything. He's sitting on the street, as this goes on, with a bullet wound in him, bleeding all over the place. And he may die tonight, he may die tomorrow, he may die a year from now, but he's holding it together for the moment. And I feel like he was Cassavetes' commentary on the little guy, kind of like the independent filmmaker, and the mafiosos are kind of like the big money men that they have to deal with. And that was kind of his commentary on the indie film racket. But I don't know, just this scared guy who this ridiculous burlesque show is the only thing holding his life together. It's the only meaning he has. And he loses everything. He's losing his girlfriend. He's losing a lot of other stuff, but he's keeping this thing going. And I found that a very compelling story. And just basically, I think.
Do you feel what do you think makes him an anti-hero, more or less? I mean, it's kind of obvious, but I just wanted to hear you put in your words.
In a lot of ways, being a flawed character, having this whole gambling addiction thing, which has hurt him and is costing him a lot, and just generally his life. That this thing that most people would consider very tawdry is what's important to him.
All right.
And what he's fighting to keep. And I don't know, the fact that he's going to go out and basically kill this guy in order to preserve it.
Well, that's the thing with anti-heroes. It's so much about context a lot of the time. And some of the characters who are doing things that mainstream society may consider not cool, not kind of tawdry and disgusting, could be a perfectly valid alternative lifestyle to someone else, and therefore in their world they're a hero, quote unquote, not an anti-hero. So sometimes it seems like the characters are defined by the other characters around them and also by the viewer, so, but yeah, we'll definitely tackle
the
that.
paradigm of general audiences.
Yeah, I feel like with anti-heroes, like morality is very relative. So it's like it's not just what the character is in and of themselves. Like Henry said, it's also relating to other characters, relating to the context of the story, relating to like, okay, well, how bad is this really when they're up against this? Or, they could have done this even worse thing, but they didn't. So things get kind of morally wibbly wobbly.
Well, that's the thing about art. You've got that leeway because it's not real. Even though there are a lot of people who will go crazy and swear to you that these stories, are real and they're going to make you into a horrible person if you watch them. But, I just am like, it's fiction. Wake the fuck up, people. It's not real.
If you're that impressionable, I'm a little concerned.
Yeah. I think people should really try to develop an individual will and critical thinking at a young age, if possible. But
critical thinking? What?
Oh yeah, that's extinct, right?
Crazy talk.
Heaven forbid.
But which do you find to want to go next, or would you like me to?
Oh, just pick someone.
Go ahead, Bill.
Oh, well, there you go.
You walked right into it.
That was my pick. Thanks. This, I was on a panel at a convention and it was about anti-heroes and I thought I was prepared. And the one guy on the panel, and I don't know his name, so I don't know, a published writer, some success. He's kind of a douchebag though. He made us guess. He's like, what do you think an anti-hero is? And we gave our definition and he said, wrong. I'm like, okay, I'm on the McLaughlin group all of a sudden. And we went through all of us, told us all we were wrong. And then he stated it's when the villain is the protagonist. It's like, okay, I guess that's one definition. So immediately I went home. It's like, this guy is totally wrong. And I looked it up and it's like, there really isn't a strong, here is a possible definition. I see it as very much a spectrum. There's heroes, there's flawed heroes, which are probably my favorite. Anti-heroes, sympathetic villains, which sometimes are called anti-villains, and then villains. But where that crossover is, because spectrums are spectrums. It's like, when does red become orange? I don't know. It's kind of.
Side note, man, we should do an anti-villain like panel.
Well, there's
my gosh, I can't believe I didn't think of that.
Oh man, I'm writing that down.
Oh my gosh, that'd be fun.
Let's see, that'd be a good sequel. See, I come up with a good idea on
adding that to the list.
And then you start thinking about it, and when you see the definitions, you're like, wow, really, when you think about it, a lot of these characters I like are kind of anti-heroes. Tyrion from Game of Thrones is an anti-hero. V for Vendetta. Diabolique from Danger Diabolique. I mean, a lot of these. Inspector, what is it? The guy from Les Miserables. The Inspector. He's
Javert.
Yeah.
Very much an anti-hero, bordering on flawed hero. Even though he's pretty much the bad guy through the whole thing, that's from a certain point of view. But the one I picked because I just felt this is a great example of a true anti-hero. I was going to go with Walter White, but Walter White goes from flawed hero to anti-hero to villain in the course of the wonderful series. So it's kind of hard to say which Walter White I'm thinking about. But he does try to redeem himself as a hero in a very Django-esque way. At the very end, they pull that out because they didn't want to have us, end with him being just a stone-cold villain. Right. But that was pretty unrealistic at the end. I liked it. Come on, fan service is great. Dexter from the show Dexter.
Yes.
Easy enough to remember. To me, a great example of an anti-hero. Although, and then when I looked into it, a lot of people are like, oh no, he's 100% the hero. I'm like, listen, folks, he's a serial killer. He's a classic serial killer. He keeps trophies. He is obsessed with this. It is his whole life revolves around this. They're like, but he only kills bad people. Said every serial killer
people.
ever. Jack the Ripper thought he was cleaning up London. All right, every single one of them, in their mind, is doing someone's work, the Lord's work or whatever. So you know, the fact that he only kills bad people. Listen, I do admire that. I do admire if you're a vampire, you'd better only be killing bad people. But that, you know, you're still a monster. You're a moralizing monster now. I'm not sure it's really an improvement.
So Michael Douglas and Falling Down, I suppose, is like that as well.
Yeah. I mean, and I like the character. He's got a lot of good qualities. He's intelligent. He knows that he's a monster, and I think that's one of my favorite kinds of monsters. The ones who are aware of their problem, and unlike some, like I mentioned before, The Vanishing. Wonderful villain in that, because he knows that he is a sociopath and he just wants to explore what that means. But at least he's aware enough. He's not justifying, oh, you know, what I do is good. He knows what he does isn't good. He knows that it's aberrant. He needs to keep it hidden. You know, yes, he goes after bad people. He saves lives. The killers that he kills would have gone on killing. But that doesn't take away from the fact that he does it in this ritualistic, weird way. He does it not really to help society. If he could get rid of the compulsion, he would not be doing this. It is the compulsion that drives him. And I think the other thing, and this really is what puts him very much into anti-villain, going into anti-hero, going into villain territory. He brings death and destruction to everyone around him. Without meaning to, but it's the nature of being a monster, that you cannot help but destroy those you care for. The fact that you care for them is a redeeming quality. Unfortunately, you're going to destroy them, and he does. Almost everyone who comes into his orbit, with very few exceptions, ends up dead, ruined. Yeah, it's a tragic.
God,
and we all know it's going to happen, except for him. He doesn't see that coming.
I think that's why he walks away. I mean, it's because he's finally kind of human. He finally experiences these human emotions of guilt and shame over hurting people and losing people and what he is. And so it's like,
and that's what I found so compelling about him as a character too. It's like it's this constant tension within him of like, I know my nature, I know that I have this desire to kill people, I know that I have like this compulsion, and I can't like stop having it, but I'm going to go about it in a good way. But also I want to just gosh darn be a normal person sometimes. And like he tries, you know, he gets a steady partner, he has a steady job that also suits his interests, you know, and also enables his behavior. So it's kind of complicated, but you know, he's really trying. And like what I found really heartbreaking and what made him so endearing to me as an anti-hero type of character is that like he doesn't really fully believe it when he's like becoming human, becoming a good person, or a relatively good person. It's like he still thinks of himself as just irredeemable. And I found that like really very human, honestly. I think that people who really struggle with their own sense of morality, it's like no matter what you do to make up for it, you're still going to think of yourself as bad. I've seen that so much with people I know.
Oh, absolutely.
On obviously a way less degree. I don't personally know any serial killers that I'm aware of. So let me figure that out.
To me, the pivot of the whole series is everyone's favorite season, the Trinity story.
Yes.
And you know, he does the right thing, and Trinity really deserves all the pain and suffering he can possibly get. But Dexter toys with him and thinks he can outsmart him. And so when he finally is satisfied, hey, I've taken down this horrible monster, then he comes home and, well,
you know, it's a great show. Yeah, right. It's a great show. It does suffer from the same problems that shows about anti-heroes often suffer from. Hannibal, another one of my favorites. Now, Hannibal I would put into the anti-villain category, if not 100% villain. The problem with these shows is that to keep them going for more than one season, eventually you have to start having utter contempt for the people around these characters who haven't figured it out. It's like, how many times can our hero get right up to the cliffhanger and somehow he pulls something out of his shorts? It just becomes unrealistic. And then therefore you inevitably have to have people discovering his secret, and either they get sucked into this, and they don't have any excuse. They're not. They weren't locked in a room with their dead mother.
I was shocked that Jen found out and then like accepted him after that. Because I was like dreading that, and then when it happened, it was like, oh wow, that's kind of interesting the way they did it. But
also the fact that like the entirety of the Miami Police Department is just utterly, completely incompetent on that show, except for Dokes, and he dies. So it's like,
yeah,
that might be why.
So figured it out, and then he gets killed. So all right, cool.
Go ahead, Chuck.
I was gonna say that's why so many of these shows seem to blow flat after a while.
3 seasons, and then it's. As much as I would have loved Hannibal to keep going, I don't know how they could have kept it going.
I'm so happy it ended when it did, just because of what we're talking about.
And frankly, Dexter, everyone hated the ending.
No, I didn't hate it.
I didn't
what
hate
ending?
it.
I don't know what you're talking about. As far as I'm concerned, Trinity's the last season.
Right. Yeah, that's actually the best. Endings are hard to stick. Listen, I'm one of the few people that actually enjoyed the last season of Game of Thrones. I realize now, in the fullness of time, and having been beaten over the head with how awful it was, I will admit, because I don't want to, be ostracized, that no, it was definitely weak. And watching it for the third time, the writing was so strong in the beginning and really did slack off at the end.
Everybody just suddenly got really, really stupid in the last season, and that just pisses me off. I'm like, don't make your smart characters dumb all of a sudden. Don't have their like critical thinking ability just like go out the window. And that's
Daenerys turning out to be an anti-villain, I think, would be a good. That didn't shock me. That was completely consistent with the way things are going. But yeah, it's hard when you set up these premises and everything. It's hard to stick it. So I thought Dexter was fine after killing off such a major character. I just didn't really want to. Yeah, I didn't want to see it to continue. Now Hannibal just ended like, sorry guys, we ran out of money and we lost the tape of the actual last episode. So everyone fell off the cliff. The end. Goodbye.
Well, they fell off the cliff, but there's that moment which you can read into all kinds of things, love, platonic love, homosexual love, whatever, spiritual kinship. And when he says it's beautiful, and it's like he's saying that them covered in wounds, dying about to fall, their death is beautiful because they're sharing it. And when Hannibal says he always wanted to share for them, like something you'd say in a romance story, it's like, I'm gonna start crying thinking about. I mean, it really, every time I watched it, it made me cry. It really did, and it was a good song by Susie minus the Banshees at the end too.
Still, unless I see their dashed bodies on the rocks.
Oh yeah. I don't. Well, we know he survived. We know Hannibal survived because they imply he captures his psychiatrist after that from the final scene. But you don't know when that took place. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the show was already a little loosey-goosey with narrative, so. But
it was very experimental.
I would have been happy to see them, and they keep talking they're going to do another season, but I don't know. A lot of time has passed, so.
I agree.
But there's Dexter. So Dexter was my first choice, and
yes,
I'm glad to see so many fans.